Hi, welcome to CEC Live, everybody. My name is Marcus Poppin, and I'm an assistant professor of special education at Washington State University. And I'm here today with Allison Lombardi and Graham Riffenbark. And today we're going to be talking about the secondary transition fidelity assessment instrument, specifically the validation of. So this is a part of a broader group project from the Division of Career Development and Transition, particularly a subcommittee that look to identify a particular need to support schools in implementing transition services across their schools. And we've done some work over the past several years to try to develop an instrument that allows schools to be able to assess their transition services and build upon the work that they're doing. So today I'm joined by Allison and Graham, but this is a much broader picture as well, where we've got several different people who are involved, specifically Kyle Reardon and Shada Rayleigh, who are unable to join us today, who put effort into helping the development of this presentation today and the submission of this, but also many other people who've been connected to the project as well. So thanks. Next slide. All right, so a little bit of an agenda for today. So first we're going to talk about some of the background and the development of the STFA. So this STFA, the Secondary Transition Fidelity Assessment, which we affectionately know as the STFA. So we're going to talk about the background and the development, particularly how it was built and some of the procedures that we've taken to pilot it. Then we're going to go through and talk about some of the results of our field testing procedures and some of our next steps. Next slide. Implementation transition is a pretty important thing. So implementation fidelity is important to ensure the effective implementation of research and secondary program practices within multi-tiered systems of support. So if we're able to understand sort of the fidelity of the practices that we're able to implement, then it's really going to help us with the overall ability to be able to implement these services within a multi-tiered system of support. Implementation fidelity is also an important piece of understanding research-based features and elements that should be prioritized as a part of implementing programs in practice. So what does the research say is going to be effective at supporting positive student outcomes, and how can we be sure that we are implementing those practices in a way that is done correctly? And then lastly, that it's also important because we really want to understand more about how these services are present within that secondary transition service structure. So to date, we really don't have information about implementation fidelity of transition services within a school. And that part of the problem that we're hoping to address is to provide an instrument that's going to allow us to do that. Next slide. So one of the things that is important is thinking about the work that we're doing from a perspective of a multi-tiered system of support, or an MTSS. So multi-tiered systems of support, they have come and they are coming into the secondary setting. And there are ways for us to kind of break down the silos and think about the work that we're doing across general education as well as special education to create a tier 1 type intervention with more intensive supports that are provided as needed. But we can view secondary transition services through this MTSS lens, where we've got these tier 1 services which should be available to all students, including those with disabilities and those without disabilities, and that for students who need it, there'd be some opportunities for them to participate in tier 2 or tier 3 interventions. So one of the things that we're trying to do is really develop a tier 1 level assessment that's going to help schools understand what are the various transition services that should be available to all students, including those with disabilities. Next slide. So we put a committee together, and we developed some procedures to be able to go through a capacity building process with school teams to be able to assess the services that are available within their schools, to be able to build action plans as a part of that assessment, and then some progress monitoring and ongoing evaluation of those plans. So when we think about the STFA, that it is an instrument, but that instrument serves as a bigger capacity building process, which includes finding people within a school or people within a district who are the right people to be a part of a team. It's finding a time for folks to be able to meet together, go out and collect some data about what types of transition services are happening within their schools, come together and meet, go through this particular instrument so that they can try to understand what are the things that are happening within their schools, look at the gaps, look at the needs from these data, and then try to develop an action plan that is going to address some of those gaps, and then continuously meet over the course of the year, or over the course of several years, to be able to evaluate their progress towards those gaps and identify new ones and continue to work together to increase the overall quality of the services within their schools. Next slide. So some of the recommended team members of the STFA include administrators, secondary special educators, secondary general educators, student service providers, and then other stakeholders as well. So students should be involved, parents, community partners, vocational rehabilitation, and other coordinating agencies. Next slide. So the STFA was developed through a subcommittee that was convened in June of 2016. So here we are in 2021. So we've been working together for about 5 years, and that we had this big picture goal of saying we want to develop a Tier 1 fidelity instrument for schools and secondary special education and transition that will, so one of those. Then we worked to gain input from other experts. Kind of under this goal, we knew that there were systems like PBIS that had already done this. And so we wanted to see, okay, what is it that's happening in other disciplines that we could bring to the field of secondary special education and transition. And so we brought people in to talk with us about how they developed those fidelity instruments, to talk about how they kind of view the process, and then learn from their experiences in the development of our own process. We came together in 2016 and we talked with a broader stakeholder group of participants in both DCDT and in to try to understand what are some of the big picture things that that stakeholders want to see in an instrument. So what do they consider essential features of transition? And so during this time, we were really trying to collect information about what does transition need to look like within a school for it to be sort of that Tier 1 level intervention. And we worked with focus groups beyond, beyond the special education world, to be able to see from CTE teachers and from folks that are working with PBIS systems, school psychologists and schools counselors, folks working in alternative schools, to try to understand what are some of their bigger perspectives when it comes to secondary special education and transition. So we worked together to develop this instrument. We'll talk about a little more about what the key features are of this instrument. But then we worked kind of in multi-phases. And so the first phase was we have sort of a draft instrument, and that we wanted to go out and do a field test to see how the process worked, what did people think about it. And then the second was really going out and doing a big validation project where we looked at item analysis to see whether or not the instrument is loading appropriately and is accurately measuring the constructs and the things that we want it to be measuring. So we're going to talk a little more about both of those phases. Next slide. So the STFA is guided by 6 critical features. So these 6 critical features include adolescent engagement and development, professional capacity, family engagement, community engagement, school level capacity, and district level capacity. So all of these items are built based upon a pretty extensive, very extensive literature review to try to understand what do we know about the different pieces of the puzzle within a school that need to be in place in order for transition services to be able to work appropriately and support students with their positive outcomes. And from that, we then, as we talked to the focus groups and talked with other people, that we really try to refine each one of those big features to get down to specific items that represented the big critical features and the big concept. So we've got critical features and then elements, which are nested within critical features. And then there's specific components, which are where we're looking at the items. And so we developed instructions as far as the capacity building process. So how can a team get together, score their assessment, and build some action planning from it. Decided on a scoring rubric. So what are we going to rate? How are people going to rate their items between like 1 and 3, or do we use a 1 and 5? So we divided on the scoring rubric. And then we provided some action planning support to be able to support teachers in using teams in using these data to inform their practices. Next slide. This is some of the sample items, and you'll also see the scoring. So under adolescent engagement, one of the components would be that a school develops individual plans based upon student interests, abilities, and college and career goals. And would this be something that you would not implement at all? Is it partially implemented, or is it fully implemented? And so we would have those on each item. So adolescent engagement is on individual planning. Professional capacity is on the use of district level data to help inform services and needs. And then last example is with family engagement and the involvement of outside of family stakeholders in the process. Next slide. And I think I will hand it over to you, Allison.
Thanks, Marcus. So I'm going to talk a little bit about phase 2. As Marcus mentioned, we had item analysis and validation. So this was after our field testing phase. We wanted to make sure that we had technical adequacy and validity of the STFA, and that meant gathering a large sample of responses, and then basically conducting a more sophisticated item analysis. So basically, we had to understand the extent to which the evidence collected on the assessment will support interpretation and use and provide further opportunities for refinement. So that's really what the goal is of an item analysis. The timeline with this particular phase, the data collection started in the spring of 2019 and went into the summer of 2020. And right now we have currently working on data analysis and writing up results, but actually the data analysis is done, and we are in the process of getting this particular manuscript published. We're in the peer review process with it currently. So again, we recruited about 1,500 participants. We had sort of a target goal of 900 participants ages 18 and older, and so we ended up getting 1,500, so we exceeded that goal. And the types of professionals that were in the sample included special ed teachers, transition specialists, school administrators, vocational rehabilitation counselors, general education teachers, guidance counselors, parents, and students. Some ways that we reached these participants was through primarily email. There were a lot of different listserv type recruitments that we did because we were working on behalf of DCDT and NTACT. There's actually quite a reach with both those networks with regard to email listservs. There was also some posts to social media, so Twitter and Facebook through the DCDT and NTACT channels. We did some recruiting there. And some of the incentives were for participants. There was incentives to have paid for DCDT conference registrations. There were also some gifts, some particular rewards like iPads, iWatch, and Amazon gift cards. So there were a couple of those each essentially. So we did a drawing to determine winners to receive some of those rewards. So on this particular slide, you'll see some information about response rate and demographics of the sample that we worked with. You'll see that we actually had 1,836 recorded responses, and essentially 595 of them were deleted for various reasons. A small number did not agree to the terms of the survey, so basically elected no. But then there was some people that agreed to the terms, but then did not respond to any of the actual items. So if that was the case, those respondents were removed. And then there were some respondents who completed fewer than 80% of the items, which not including the demographic items in the beginning. And so if that were the case, we basically had a decision rule to remove them from the sample. So essentially we had 1,241 respondents that completed 80% or more of the items. So that's essentially what some of these data that you're seeing here is. You'll notice that the kinds of professional settings that you see, the bottom bar chart with the orange bars, you'll see that there's high school, middle school, and 18 to 21-year-old programs were kind of split up between those kinds of settings. And you'll notice that in the other bar chart on the bottom, the one with the green bars, you'll see that we had a large number of special ed teachers in the sample, 674 to be precise. We also had some transition specialists, but together transition specialists and special ed teacher were the largest number of responders. So keep that in mind when thinking about the results. We really are basing these findings at this point on that particular type of professional. All right, so now I think we're going to turn it over to Graham.
Thanks, Allison. So I'll talk about the individual item analyses that we conducted for this project. So as you recall, there's 3 response levels for each of the items. So we're dealing with categorical data here. So all the models I talk about are treating them as categorical. But before we went on to the more advanced methods, we first looked at classical test theory type indices. So that's this first point on item analysis. So inter-item correlations, we wanted to see how correlated items were to one another from the same hypothesized construct. We also wanted to look at item difficulties. So were there items where practically everyone gave a 3 response or maybe a 0 response? That would be problematic moving forward. And finally, item discrimination. These are correlations with the total score from each construct with individual items. And that gives you a sense for whether they discriminate or not. So next, we went on to exploratory factor analysis. And what we did prior to this was we created a split sample. Because we had a large number of responses available to us, we took half of them and subjected them to this EFA. Now, the EFA is an important step in measure development, as it allows you to investigate the dimensionality of the assessment. So we hypothesized that there are 6 factors based on these critical features. And so what the EFA allows us to do is look at model fit and theoretical rationales to see whether or not we have 6 factors, maybe we have 4 factors, or maybe it's just one really large factor. So that's why the EFA is important. Based on the results of the EFA, we can then confirm it using an independent sample that we did not use for the EFA. And so that, again, just confirms the structure of the STFA. Once we confirmed the structure of the STFA, we proceeded to do invariance testing based on DCDT region in the US. So for this step, we used the full sample, but we cut it into 4 groups. So the Northwest, the Southwest, Northeast, and Southeast. And so next slide. So from the EFA, we found that we had a 5-factor solution. So this offered the best model fit of the other solutions. And it also theoretically made sense. So you'll notice that factors 1 and 2, those stayed virtually the same as hypothesized. Those are adolescent engagement and professional capacity. Now, the next factor, district community collaboration, That was the merging of a couple of our hypothesized factors, and same with school-family collaboration and inclusive and tiered instruction. That was a subset of the school-level capacity construct. So again, we ran the CFA and we confirmed that this 5-factor structure was correct, or that's what the data suggests. So next slide. So again, we did the invariance testing based on regional comparison. And we had a couple little workers that created this map for us. You'll see here on the left, this is during quarantine, putting them to work when there was no schoolwork. So anyways, maybe I'll just talk a little bit about measurement invariance and what that tells us. So there's several stages. The first is configural or form invariance, and that's looking at whether the same pattern is the same across all groups. So does the factor structure hold across all 4 of these groups? After that is metric invariance, which is where you look at whether or not the factor loadings or the rate at which an item can discriminate from someone that's low or high on professional capacity, for example, is the same across region. Next is scalar invariance, and that's whether you can constrain the intercept or the expected value of each of the items to be the same across region. So let's go to the next slide. With that in mind, I can show you our findings. So we were able to establish form invariance and metric invariance. However, we were not able to establish scalar invariance. So what this means is that the level of endorsement from not implemented, partially implemented, fully implemented, the probability of giving those responses really depends on the region. So that suggests that these transition services may differ considerably across the 4 regions. And so do you think the 5 factors address all aspects of transition fidelity? We're still trying to figure this out, but this is our first crack at making an argument for the validity of the eventual scores from the STFA. Next slide.
Thanks, Graham. I'll talk a little bit about the next phase, which we'll be moving to. We haven't gotten to this phase yet, and that's user testing. So we still need to test the overall STFA process with stakeholders. We've been talking about key stakeholders this whole time. Marcus talked a little bit about the different roles as far as who should be at the table when using this assessment. We would then want to make sure that we're recruiting full high school teams to participate. In this most recent item analysis phase, in phase 2, we were having individuals essentially take the survey. We want this to be a team-based approach, so we would need to really study teams using the measure essentially, and that might include some video recording of teams using the STFA and some interviewing of the teams about the process after. All of that would be included in this user testing phase. We also want to look at how school level differences might impact STFA scores. So is it a school where MTSS is already currently in place and pretty strong, or something like PBIS, which is a behavioral supports version of MTSS? Does that somehow impact STFA scores? We suspect maybe it could, but we don't know. So that's another question we'd like to ask in the next phase. And that's all we have today for you to present as far as the STFA. We look forward to having a question and answer session with you on the 13th of March. Hopefully you've watched this video ahead of time and have detailed questions for us. I will say that if you wanted to reach out to any of us ahead of that time or after that time, feel free to email us. Our names and email addresses are on this slide. And then finally, just another reminder about DCDT, which is the Division on Career Development and Transition within CEC. We're all members of DCDT, and we mentioned how this particular study was a sort of a collaborative effort between DCDT and NTACT, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. And we hope that if you are a secondary transition professional, that you are a member of DCDT or you'll become a member soon, because we do feel that there are many, many benefits to being a member of this organization. Thank you very much. That's all we have for you today.
Thanks.